It was almost Halloween in October of 1979 when a Lancaster, South Carolina physician, who also worked as an assistant county coroner, failed to show up for work. His colleagues heard conflicting stories about where he was, and one business owner felt the need to alert the police. When the doctor was discovered murdered, the community hoped his killer would soon be caught. But it would take more than a year before an arrest was made, and it highlighted the dangers of mixing business with pleasure and just how deadly a love affair can turn. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Episode 158, The Murder of Dr. Joe Smith in Lancaster, South Carolina. 51-year-old Dr. Joe Smith was a fixture around the Lancaster, South Carolina community for many years. He had a practice as a general practitioner, worked as the jail physician for Chester County and the city, and as the assistant coroner for Lancaster County. He'd grown up in Anderson, where his father was employed by Swift and Company. After graduating from high school, he joined the military. After a tour of duty, he entered medical school. It was Bob Perry, the owner of Perry's Pharmacy, which was located on York Street next to Smith's office, that first noticed something was wrong. He was used to seeing Joe come in and out of the pharmacy multiple times a day. Perry saw Joe early that morning, but not the next day. He began inquiring at the physician's office about the whereabouts of his friend on Tuesday. At first, Joe's staff thought he had gone to Anderson to help assist in getting his mother into a nursing home, but then she called the office on Tuesday and said she hadn't seen him. Perry went to the sheriff, and they decided to do a welfare check on his friend and colleague at his riverfront home south of Fort Lawn in Chester County, about 5 miles west of Lancaster. Joe was separated from his wife Betty at the time and lived alone. There, around 7 p.m., Detective Jim Boswell, former Fort Lawn Police Chief Kenneth Eagle, and Joe Smith's son-in-law Daniel Bailey went into the home. They removed a window pane from the kitchen door, unlocked the door, and went inside. There, they found Joe Smith deceased in his bedroom, underneath a pile of clothes taken from his closet, and also underneath an electric blanket, which was still turned on. The man had been shot multiple times in the chest and the head with two .38 caliber pistols. I couldn't help thinking about the hundreds of crime scenes and natural deaths that we had been together investigating, and here I was investigating his death, said Lancaster County Sheriff Nay Parks. He described Joe Smith as having the kind of analytical mind necessary for investigating death scenes and the contacts around the state to get answers quickly. The preliminary autopsy report showed the wounds were not self-inflicted. The presence of the electric blanket made it difficult to pinpoint the physician's time of death. Investigators found no signs of forced entry into his one-story brick home. To the general public, it appeared the case stalled quickly. News reports of what was happening during the investigation were non-existent for at least a year. Of course, we'll never really know what investigators suspected or knew or what kind of physical evidence they were hoping to find before issuing an arrest warrant. 2 agents from the State Law Enforcement Division were assigned to Joe Smith's unsolved murder case in September of 1980. Laboratory tests determined he had been shot by 2 .38 caliber pistols, both of which he owned. One was found in his kitchen, and the other was recovered in the attic of the home by the doctor's son, Joe Smith III, several days after the murder. Joe's colleagues at the White Springs Memorial Hospital in Lancaster last saw him on the morning of October 29, 1979, when he helped to deliver a baby. A woman named Pearl Chandler, who said she worked as Smith's receptionist and bookkeeper, told police she saw him later that day when she borrowed his car to go shopping in Rock Hill. Pearl said she returned his car, but didn't see him. She got into her own car and then returned home. A year after the murder, Chester County Sheriff Bobby Orr said the investigation was ongoing. In fact, he told the media that he was confident the crime would be solved and an arrest would be made. That arrest was made more than 6 months later. On May 22nd, 1981, a year and a half after Dr. Joe Smith Jr. was murdered in his home, police arrested 42-year-old Pearl Chandler, a nurse from Lancaster, and charged her with the murder. This was the Pearl Chandler who said she'd borrowed Joe's car during the time friends and colleagues noticed he was missing. She was also charged with several different forgery counts. In a strange twist, Pearl Chandler was the ex-wife of Richard Chandler Sr., who was the Lancaster County coroner at the time of Joe's death. She'd been separated from her husband when Joe was murdered and had been in a relationship with Joe until weeks prior. Sheriff Orr said the warrant was issued based on an intensive investigation by the Chester and Lancaster Sheriff's Departments, the State Law Enforcement Division, and the Bureau of Drug Control of the State Department of Health and Environmental Control. The Bureau of Drug Control charged Pearl with 2 counts of obtaining drugs by forged prescriptions and 1 count of obtaining controlled substances by a forged prescription. SLED charged her with 5 counts of forging checks. A circuit court judge set bond for Pearl at $10,000. She quickly posted the bond and was released. Her trial began in late October of 1981 and lasted only 3 days. The jury consisted of 4 men and 8 women. The prosecution presented 62 pieces of evidence in Pearl Chandler's trial and called 28 witnesses to testify. Prosecutor John Justice told reporters his plan was to present Pearl Chandler's motives for murder as greed and scorn. Sheriff Bobby Orr said his office found several checks from Joe Smith's account deposited in Pearl's bank account and used to pay her bills several days after he was murdered. Marvin Dawson, a State Law Enforcement Division handwriting expert, told the jury that 5 checks and several prescriptions with Joe Smith's signature had been forged by Pearl Chandler. The case against Pearl, though, was largely circumstantial. Here are a few details that came out during the trial. Sheriff Orr said investigators found a blood-spattered yellow plastic cup containing remnants of vodka and cherries in the bathroom at Joe Smith's house. Gwendolyn Parker, who also worked in Joe's office, testified that Pearl often drank from a cup with clear liquid and cherries in it. On October 15, 1979, Joe had fired Pearl from her receptionist bookkeeper position and called police to help remove her from the office. He was murdered 14 days later. While Pearl was a receptionist at the time of Joe's death, she went on to receive her training as a nurse in the year and a half prior to her arrest. On October 29, 1979, Pearl Chandler made several calls to let people know Joe Smith would not be at work. At 10:20 a.m., Gwendolyn Parker's mother said Pearl phoned her daughter at 8:30 a.m., saying the office was going to be closed for fumigation, and then called back an hour later to say Joe was going to Anderson. In Joe Smith's car that was parked in his driveway, investigators found his billfold and a checkbook in a suitcase. The billfold was empty of money, but contained his identification cards, and 5 checks were missing from the back of the checkbook. Ballistics test confirmed Joe Smith was killed with 2 of his own .38 caliber pistols. The prosecution presented a letter Pearl wrote to Joe Smith 4 days after he fired her as his receptionist. The letter had been kept in a safety deposit box at the Central Carolina Bank in Lancaster and was discovered in September of 1980. The letter read, "Joe, I needed the money to pay tuition. Sorry, I thought you were more serious about me. I fell hard, but love you so much. In case anything happens to me, your ring will be worth at least $3,000. I had it appraised, and you have life insurance on me. This should help repay any trouble I caused you. I was not as bad as you thought and didn't do many things I got credit for. But for some reason, you have made up your mind about me. You were my world, what I lived for. Children have their own lives, but I had centered mine around you. Sorry about being a pest. I loved you more than life. I'm putting this in writing in case something happens to me. I don't know why Sissy set out to hurt me, but she said she would win, and I guess I thought your love for me was stronger. Remember, you said you were possessive and wanted me to yourself, and I believed you. Now I have nothing. My family says I tried to tell you, and Betty called and said, ha ha ha. Money will buy anything, even Sissy. I guess that's the answer. There's another box that will be opened in your presence, and you and everyone will find a lot of answers to your questions and what I'm guilty of. I saved your life twice. You might miss me someday. Forever love, Pearl. The letter was found along with a pink Valentine's Day card Joe had sent to Pearl. The Betty she referred to in the letter was Joe Smith's estranged wife, and Sissy was the nickname for Joe's other employee, Gwendolyn Parker. From what I can tell in this letter, Joe must have figured out Pearl was embezzling money from the office and fired her. Maybe Gwendolyn Parker tipped him off that something wasn't right with the financial records. The letter reads to me as if Pearl was planning to harm herself, especially because she mentions the ring and life insurance policy with Joe as the beneficiary, possibly. I can only guess about that because I wasn't able to find a deeper discussion of the letter and what it meant in any of the articles I found. Pearl's son, Richard Chandler Jr., testified he found a ring belonging to Joe Smith in a freezer at his mother's house in Elgin, on top of a package of meat. The freezer was in the carport of her home in Lancaster. When he was first questioned by SLED agents, he told them he'd found the ring in a car his mother used. Then he changed the story to the freezer. He told attorneys at the trial he'd initially lied because he was questioned in front of his mother, and he was worried about upsetting her. He also said Joe Smith and Pearl had been dating for 2 years at that point. The ring was a diamond-studded horseshoe-shaped piece of jewelry Joe Smith liked to wear to horse shows. The center of the ring featured a horse's head. Richard said he held on to the ring after he initially found it and didn't tell his mother he had it. His reasoning was that she was quite upset about Joe's death. Her son said he wanted to keep the ring because it was the only thing his mother had to remember her former lover by. Charleston pathologist Dr. Sandra Conradi told jurors Joe Smith was killed as he lay in bed clothed in a t-shirt. 4 of the 8 bullets that hit him were fired from close range. She found powder burns on his skin next to his sideburns. The first 2 bullets that hit him near the temple did extensive damage to his brain. She concluded that although the first 2 bullets likely would have caused his death, the 6 additional shots were fired into his body while his heart continued to pump blood. Before we continue, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsors. I had been unhappy with my old podcast host for a while and was looking for other options. I discovered Riverside FM and learned that for one low monthly fee, it would help me record the podcast and utilize video capabilities. It uses AI technology to easily create clips from each episode that I can then share on my social media accounts. I don't consider myself to be very tech savvy, but audio and video editing with Riverside FM software has been a breeze, and I look forward to recording days now. If you're looking for a company that will help you with all your podcasting, webinar, and video needs, I encourage you to check out Riverside FM. You won't be disappointed. I'll include a link for you in the show notes. Are you looking to level up your writing or learn a new skill? Whether you focus on nonfiction or are more inclined to creative writing, or want to learn how to put together a digital portfolio of your writing, Wow Women on Writing can help. Interested in podcasting? Check out my digital course, You Can Start a Podcast. During this pre-recorded webinar, you will learn the benefits of creating your own podcast, materials you need to get started, how to develop content that will keep listeners coming back for more, and ways your podcast can create supplemental income. I'll share examples of different types of podcasts, how to decide on a format, ways to handle the technology necessary for creating a podcast, how to develop your first few episodes, promotion and monetization ideas, and ways you can repurpose your podcast content. All written materials and resources are provided by me. I'll also give you a handout with information discussed in the webinar, along with suggestions for a few different types of podcasts to explore. Best of all, it only costs $30. Learn more by clicking the Classes tab at Wow-Women on Writing. I'll put a link in the show notes. And now, let's get back to the show. Solicitor John Justice said he believed Pearl was humiliated after Joe fired her from his office and did not want him to break off their relationship. He surmised that after delivering the baby at Elliott White Springs Memorial Hospital in the early morning hours of October 29th, Joe returned home and went to sleep. Pearl probably spent the night at the house and decided to shoot him while he slept, perhaps after consuming too much alcohol and prescription medication. Before the jury began their deliberations, Pearl's attorney, Barry Mobley, called for a directed verdict in favor of his client because of insufficient evidence. 13th Circuit Judge Frank Epps denied the motion. Pearl didn't testify on her own behalf, and her attorneys did not offer a rebuttal after the prosecution's closing arguments. The jury foreman, Paul Jones, said these two facts factored into their guilty verdict. Pearl and her defense team offered up no reason why she should be found innocent. They didn't even call any witnesses of their own. Jones also said the jury had discussed whether there could have been more than one person firing the guns that killed Joe. Pearl's defense attorneys mentioned a former employee of Joe's or his brother-in-law could have been suspects. Members of the jury asked about the blood spatter on 3 walls of the bedroom at the crime scene. On October 28, 1981, after 2.5 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict in the murder of Dr. Joe Smith. His widow, Betty, told the media the family was happy about the verdict. His son said, "We were uncertain how it was going to turn out. We kept our hopes up. We had talked it over and decided that no matter what, we would abide by the decision of the court. We didn't want to start a long-term feud between the families or have feelings of revenge." If you'll remember, Pearl Chandler was questioned a few days after Joe Smith's body was discovered. She wasn't charged with the crime until a 1.5 years later. Because of that delay, her attorneys suggested the sheriff's department may have felt pressured into making an arrest. "Not so," said Chester County Sheriff Bobby Orr. He told the state newspaper, "There was no pressure put upon me. I don't bend to pressure. If any pressure had been exerted by anyone, that pressure came from me to get the investigation completed so we were able to get a warrant." I wasn't able to find any photos of Dr. Joe Smith or Pearl Chandler in all the media coverage I read about this case. But I will say Pearl was often described as an attractive blonde, which I always find interesting when reading about these older cases involving female defendants and the way they are covered. The Herald described the defendant and the scene in the courtroom as the verdict was read like this. The attractive, blue-eyed blonde, wearing a gray herringbone dress and blue blouse, displayed no emotion during sentencing or while jurors individually answered yes during a poll of the jury at the end of the trial. The petite woman wept openly as she was led to jail by Chester County Sheriff's deputies. Pearl Chandler didn't spend one full night in custody before being transferred to Chester County Hospital. Records showed she was admitted to the emergency room on October 29th, treated and released. What she was treated for is unknown. She spent the rest of the night in the jail and was transferred the next day to the South Carolina Department of Corrections Center in Columbia. The week after her conviction, Pearl's attorneys announced they would be appealing the verdict. I noticed they told the Herald that they didn't believe the 43-year-old church organist deserved to spend the next 20 years behind bars. This was the first time I ever saw her described as a church organist. Attorney Barry Mobley said he didn't know what grounds they would base the appeal on, but had 30 days to prepare a case of exceptions. After that, I couldn't find any reporting on what happened in the appeals process. In fact, it's difficult to locate any further information about Pearl Hunter Chandler. I would assume she served out most of her sentence and was paroled after close to 20 years, but that's only an assumption. Her name is a very common one in the Carolinas, and I'm guessing she might have changed it at some point. Maybe Pearl Chandler came out of prison remorseful and a rehabilitated woman, but at this point, I just don't know. This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people and true crimes profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. All episodes are researched and written by me, Renee Robertson, with sound editing provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.